Out. You wake before the rooster because the cold wakes you first. It is not a polite cold. It does not knock. It crawls inside your mouth and sits on your tongue like iron. The thatch above you leaks a faint dust of frost. Your breath clouds the dark, pale as a confession. Somewhere in the black corner of the cottage, a woman stifles a sound that is not quite pain and not quite pleasure. You know that sound. You pretend you do not. Outside, the January wind from the North Sea lashes the timber walls of your village in 1316, the year after the rains began, the year the grain rotted, the year hunger became a personality trait. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives with mud. Endless mud. The fields drown. The wheat fails. Bread becomes a rumor. You roll toward the hearth. The embers are dead. Your fingers touch ash so cold it feels wet. You think about wood the way modern people think about Wi-Fi. Lose it, and everything collapses. Your wife shifts beside you. The priest says you may only join her body for procreation. No lust, no creative enthusiasm, just the official purpose. As if human heat can be itemized by God like a ledger entry. He is wrong, of course. You both know it. Here is what matters. When the cold seeps through the wattle and daub walls, bodies become furnaces. Survival is not modest. It is practical. In medieval Europe, especially across England, northern France, and the German lands, most peasants lived in one-room structures. Timber frame, woven hazel rods packed with clay. A central hearth. No chimney at first. Smoke slips through the roof like a reluctant ghost. Livestock often share the space. A cow's breath adds warmth. A pig snorts in the corner. Romance dies quickly when a goat watches you. But heat is heat. The church, meanwhile, has opinions, many opinions. In 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council tightens moral discipline. Parish priests are expected to monitor sexual behavior. Confession becomes mandatory at least once a year. Your thoughts are now audit material. You kneel in the dim nave on Sundays while Father Guillaume preaches about sin warming the flesh more than any fire. He does not mention that even monks slept two to a bed during brutal winters. Celibacy is easier in summer. You rise from your straw mattress. The floor is hard-packed earth. Your toes crack with cold. You push aside the shutter. The world is silver. Frost grips the cabbage leaves like glass. Last night, you heard your neighbor Agnes through the wall. Her husband died in the famine. She now shares her bed with a man not her husband. The priest calls it fornication. She calls it surviving February, because here is the secret. Winter rearranges morality. When temperatures drop during what historians call the medieval warm period's decline and the early stirrings of the Little Ice Age, communities cluster. People sleep closer. Privacy thins. Regulation tightens. And yet desire persists. You step outside. The air slices your lungs. The village well is frozen at the edges. A boy strikes it with a stone. The crack echoes like a warning. You remember last winter when a traveling friar told a story of Lapland, where people sleep inside animal skins and burn whale oil. He described it with horror. You thought it sounded efficient. Efficiency is underrated. Inside the cottage again, your wife pulls the wool blanket tighter. Wool is gold. Linen is death in winter. The wealthy have tapestries. You have sheep if you are lucky. If not, you barter for scraps. At night, you build what historians later call a box bed. Wooden panels trap heat. Curtains close. Air warms from breath alone. It is medieval climate control. Primitive, yes. Effective, absolutely. And in that tight wooden coffin of warmth, bodies pressed together. The church writes penitentials listing forbidden stays for sex, Sundays, feast, days, Lent, Advent, pregnancy, menstruation, after childbirth, during fasts, on certain saints' days. If you follow the calendar strictly, you begin to suspect God prefers you celibate and freezing. You do the math. There are not many legal nights left. But when the wind screams and the firewood runs thin, you and your wife do not consult the liturgical schedule. You generate heat. Dry humor creeps in even now. If survival were a sin, half the village would be excommunicated by February. The cold does something else. It exposes class. In the manor house, thick stone walls and tapestries trap warmth. Servants bring braziers. Fur-lined cloaks hang heavy on carved pegs. You have mud and hope. The Lord's steward counts grain in a locked storehouse. You count days until thaw. And still, life persists. Babies are conceived in January darkness. Not because peasants are reckless, because warmth requires contact, because despair seeks comfort, because you are human. By candlelight that smells faintly of tallow and animal fat, you lean closer to your wife. The wind rattles the shutters. And somewhere beyond the village edge, beneath the frozen trees, something else is moving toward you with the cold. Beds of straw and secret heat. You crawl into the straw and it crackles under your weight. Straw is insulation. Straw is mattress. Straw is sometimes dinner for livestock if things go badly enough. You learn not to complain. By 1400, across England and parts of northern Europe, peasants commonly slept on straw pallets laid directly on the ground or raised on simple wooden frames. The wealthy owned feather beds. You own whatever does not rot first. You lie on your side, back pressed to your wife, and feel the warmth collect between your bodies. It is not romance as painted in illuminated manuscripts. It is tactical positioning. The church says marital sex must be purposeful. No excessive pleasure, no strange positions, definitely no creativity. Theologians like Thomas Aquinas write about natural law. You wonder if he has ever tried sleeping alone in January. Here is the tension. Sexuality is both policed and necessary. Canon law governs marriage. Consummation makes it binding. Without it, annulment is possible. The church needs proof of intercourse to validate union, yet condemns lust within it. A neat paradox. Confession becomes a surveillance system. Priests ask direct questions. Did you spill seed? Did you lie with your wife on a forbidden stay? Did you take pleasure? In small villages, privacy is a myth. Walls are thin. Gossip is insulation against boredom. And yet peasants adapt. You build bed curtains. Thick wool if you can afford it. Even rough linen blocks drafts. Heat gathers like breath inside a jar. In some regions, families sleep multiple to a bed. Children, parents, sometimes an elderly relative. Modern sensibilities panic at this. Medieval peasants call it Tuesday. But proximity creates complications. You hear stories whispered at the well. A young couple discovered before marriage. A widow accused of entertaining men after dark. The local bailiff reporting irregular cohabitation. In 1382, English church courts record cases of fornication and clandestine marriage. The records are blunt. Names, dates, accusations, no poetry. You imagine your own name inked on parchment. Guilty of warmth. The cold season intensifies scrutiny. Winter evenings stretch long, work slows, minds wander. Desire has time to breathe. Your neighbor Martin once joked that God created winter so peasants would reproduce out of boredom. You laughed. The priest did not. Let me explain something practical. Body heat matters. A human body generates around 100 watts of heat at rest. Multiply that by 2 or 3 people beneath wool and straw in a sealed wooden frame, and you create a small ecosystem. Primitive physics. No theology required. Livestock share walls. Their warmth radiates. In longhouses of Scandinavia and parts of Britain, animals and humans coexist under one roof precisely for thermal advantage. You wake one night to your wife's hand finding yours beneath the blanket. Outside, snow presses against the door. Inside, breath fogs the dark. You think of the priest's warnings. You think of the famine graves beyond the churchyard. You choose warmth. Across Europe, marginal communities also find ways to resist strict moral control. Folk customs persist. Fertility charms carved into bedposts. Herbal mixtures believed to increase vigor or prevent conception. Women share knowledge quietly. Pennyroyal, rue, tansy. Risky, sometimes deadly. But knowledge spreads through whispers, not sermons. The church condemns contraception as sinful. Yet records show prosecutions for abortion and sorcery of herbs. If it did not happen, there would be no need to outlaw it. Desire does not disappear under doctrine. It adapts. In your village, an old woman named Isabel mutters that cold nights belong to lovers, not bishops. She was fined once for slander. She still mutters. Snow piles high against the cottage. Firewood dwindles. You ration it carefully. One log saved means one more night of survivable heat. You and your wife lie close again. The straw rustles. The darkness thickens. And just beyond your shutter, someone pauses outside your wall, listening. Hunger, heresy, and the body the cold deepens into something almost holy. By the early 14th century, Europe stumbles into climate instability. Historians later call it the onset of the Little Ice Age. Harvests shrink. Cattle die. Famine revisits like an unwelcome relative. Hunger changes how you see the body. When food is scarce, flesh becomes both precious and suspect. Thinness is common. Strength is rare. Sexual desire feels almost indecent when children starve. The church interprets famine as divine correction. Sermons grow sharper. Sin is blamed for weather. Lust is blamed for crop failure. You did not know wheat cared about your marriage bed, but apparently it does. In times of crisis, regulation tightens. Sumptuary laws restrict clothing and display, though mostly aimed at townsfolk and rising merchants. Still, the message filters down. Know your place. Cover your body. Control your appetite. Yet winter forces intimacy that you share meals thin as broth. You huddle together for warmth. The same closeness that keeps you alive fuels temptation. In 1348, when the Black Death sweeps into Europe, panic multiplies. Mortality fractures communities. Some turn to extreme piety. Others abandon restraint entirely. Chroniclers describe groups indulging in drink and sex as death looms. If tomorrow is uncertain, tonight becomes urgent. You stand in the churchyard watching the shallow grave filled. Frost rims the edges. You feel your wife's fingers slip into yours. The priest says restraint honors God. The grave says life is short. Psychological dread settles into the village like smoke. Fear amplifies control. Authorities prosecute moral offenses more aggressively during crises. Scapegoats appear. Women, especially, bear suspicion. Widows accused of seduction. Midwives accused of witchcraft. Healers accused of interfering with God's design. And yet resistance continues. You hear of Lollards in England during the late 14th century, followers of John Wycliffe, questioning church authority. They criticize clerical wealth and demand scripture in English. Not directly about sex, but about power. Question power, and everything connected to it trembles. If priests can be wrong about money, perhaps they can be wrong about marriage beds too. You return home to your low fire. The thatch leaks cold air. Your wife sits mending wool socks. Her fingers are cracked and red. You notice the curve of her shoulder in candlelight. Desire feels almost rebellious now. Dry humor surfaces even here. Apparently, the apocalypse improves your libido. Who knew? But tension grows. Rumors spread of ecclesiastical courts inspecting households suspected of moral disorder. Neighbors report neighbors. Confession becomes interrogation. You imagine a knock at your door. Inside your cottage. The air is thick with smoke and something else. Determination. Because winter survival is not just about firewood. It is about solidarity. It is about bodies close enough to defy frost. Outside, the wind carries church bells through the frozen air, and you begin to wonder whether warmth itself is becoming an act of defiance. Hunger, heresy, and the body the cold deepens into something almost holy. By the early 14th century, Europe stumbles into climate instability. Historians later call it the onset of the Little Ice Age. Harvests shrink. Cattle die. Famine revisits like an unwelcome relative. Hunger changes how you see the body. When food is scarce, flesh becomes both precious and suspect. Thinness is common. Strength is rare. Sexual desire feels almost indecent when children starve. The church interprets famine as divine correction. Sermons grow sharper. Sin is blamed for weather. Lust is blamed for crop failure. You did not know wheat cared about your marriage bed, but apparently it does. In times of crisis, regulation tightens. Sumptuary laws restrict clothing and display, though mostly aimed at townsfolk and rising merchants. Still, the message filters down. Know your place. Cover your body. Control your appetite. Yet winter forces intimacy. You share meals thin as broth. You huddle together for warmth. The same closeness that keeps you alive fuels temptation. In 1348, when the Black Death sweeps into Europe, panic multiplies. Mortality fractures communities. Some turn to extreme piety. Others abandon restraint entirely. Chroniclers describe groups indulging in drink and sex as death looms. If tomorrow is uncertain, tonight becomes urgent. You stand in the churchyard watching a shallow grave filled. Frost rims the edges. You feel your wife's fingers slip into yours. The priest says restraint honors God. The grave says life is short. Psychological dread settles into the village like smoke. Fear amplifies control. Authorities prosecute moral offenses more aggressively during crises. Scapegoats appear. Women, especially, bear suspicion. Widows accused of seduction. Midwives accused of witchcraft. Healers accused of interfering with God's design, and yet resistance continues. You hear of Lollards in England during the late 14th century, followers of John Wycliffe, questioning church authority. They criticize clerical wealth and demand scripture in English, not directly about sex, but about power. Question power, and everything connected to it trembles. If priests can be wrong about money, perhaps they can be wrong about marriage beds too. You return home to your low fire. The thatch leaks cold air. Your wife sits mending wool socks. Her fingers are cracked and red. You notice the curve of her shoulder in candlelight. Desire feels almost rebellious now. Dry humor surfaces even here. Apparently, the apocalypse improves your libido. Who knew? But tension grows. Rumors spread of ecclesiastical courts inspecting households suspected of moral disorder. Neighbors report neighbors. Confession becomes interrogation. You imagine a knock at your door. Inside your cottage. The air is thick with smoke and something else. Determination. Because winter survival is not just about firewood. It is about solidarity. It is about bodies close enough to defy frost. Outside, the wind carries church bells through the frozen air, and you begin to wonder whether warmth itself is becoming an act of defiance. The widow of Ash Hollow. You first notice her because she does not bow her head during the sermon. Ash Hollow lies at the edge of the Manorlands, a scatter of cottages near a patch of forest that traps cold like a bowl. Her name is Eleanor, widow, 30 years old. Too young to be alone. Too old, some say, to be desirable without scandal. Her husband died in the famine winter. Fever, then weakness, then silence. She buried him when the ground was barely soft enough to break. Now she lives in a cottage smaller than yours. No livestock, limited wood. A single narrow bed. The priest warns her gently about propriety. A widow must be modest. No late visitors. No unnecessary laughter. Grief should be visible. Eleanor does not perform grief correctly. You hear whispers that a miller has been seen near her door after dark. You also hear that she trades herbs for wool, that she refuses to remarry quickly. Suspicion grows like frost patterns on glass. Here is the emotional center. Winter is brutal for widows. Without a husband, labor doubles. Protection thins. Social scrutiny sharpens. Survival becomes negotiation. You pass her cottage one evening delivering kindling. Through the shutter crack, you see candlelight flicker across her face. She sits close to the miller, not touching, close enough. The church would call it temptation. You call it insulation. Canon law allows widows to remarry, encourages it, even for stability. But community gossip polices timing. Too soon, and she is shameless. Too late, and she is suspicious. Eleanor chooses neither. She maintains her own household, accepts help selectively, allows warmth without official sanction. One night, a storm hits hard. Snow piles high. You hear later that the miller stayed until morning. The priest hears too. An ecclesiastical court summons her in early 1402. The charge, fornication and scandal. Records from similar cases show penance is imposed. Public confession, fines, sometimes temporary excommunication. You stand at the back of the church as Eleanor faces the priest. Candlelight trembles across stone walls. She admits to companionship, refuses shame. Her voice is steady. The air is not. She argues survival. Says winter kills the isolated. Says warmth is not sin. The priest cites scripture. She cites frostbite. The congregation shifts uncomfortably, because everyone understands her logic. Ultimately, she receives penance. A fine she can barely afford. A warning. But something changes. That winter, more widows quietly accept male visitors. More unmarried couples share space when storms rage. Enforcement softens at the edges. Not officially, practically. Resistance does not look like rebellion. It looks like survival strategies. You return home after the hearing. Your wife sits by the hearth, adding the last of the wood. You lie together again that night, not just for heat, not just for comfort, but because watching Eleanor stand beneath candlelight and refuse to freeze alone has unsettled something inside you. Outside, Ash Hollow disappears beneath Snowdot inside. You wonder how many sins are simply names given to people who refuse to die quietly. And as the wind claws at your door, you realize winter is not the only force tightening its grip. Smoke in the rafters, as smoke never really leaves. It coils in the rafters, blackens the beams, settles into your lungs like a second winter. By February, your cottage smells of damp wool, ash, and unwashed bodies. You stop noticing. Visitors do not. You wake in the dark to coughing. Your youngest has it again. The wet, rattling kind that echoes too loud in a one-room house. Here's what matters. Medieval survival is architecture as much as endurance. Most peasant homes across 14th century England and northern France are built with central hearths and no proper chimneys until later improvements spread. Smoke escapes through louvered openings in the roof. Some of it escapes. The rest lingers. Long-term exposure means irritated lungs, inflamed eyes, shortened lives. But the hearth is life. You guard it like a relic. You rise, poke the embers, coax flame from the stubborn coals. Your wife wraps the children tighter in wool. The cow shifts in the adjoining space, her breath fogging the partition boards. Yes, you share air with livestock, because their body heat lifts the room temperature by precious degrees. Practicality over pride. The priest preaches about purity. Meanwhile, you sleep beside a goat for thermal efficiency. So much for hierarchy. Outside, frost hardens manure in the yard. Inside, you boil barley thin enough to see the bottom of the pot. Hunger sharpens tempers. It also sharpens suspicion. Church courts continue to track sexual misconduct. Surviving English ecclesiastical records from the late 1300s show recurring charges: fornication, adultery, clandestine betrothals. Winter gatherings create opportunities. Shared space breeds rumor. But winter also changes rhythms of labor. Fields rest under snow. Work shifts indoors, spinning, mending, carving tools. Evenings lengthen. Firelight turns faces golden and intimate. You sit with neighbors some nights, passing a jug of weak ale. Stories move around the circle. Saints and sinners. Wolves and witches. Someone mentions a couple caught in the granary last week. Laughter ripples. Not outrage, laughter. Because everyone understands cold. Let me explain the tension clearly. Official doctrine restricts sexual expression. Survival conditions encourage closeness. The gap between law and lived reality widens in winter. Women manage much of the domestic thermal strategy. Layering wool, hanging thick cloth over door cracks, banking embers overnight. Knowledge passed from mother to daughter. Men chop wood, haul peat, patch roofs. But inside the cottage, women rule heat. And heat, in January, is power. You watch your wife direct the arrangement of bedding. Straw fluffed, blankets layered strategically. Children placed between adults to maximize shared warmth. It is choreography. Intimacy is inevitable in confined space. So is awareness. The church forbids intercourse during certain holy days. But those days do not exempt you from frostbite. You remember Father Guillaume once describing the body as a vessel for sin. Tonight, your body is a furnace for your children. Dry thought crosses your mind. If hell is eternal fire, at least it is warm. A knock sounds suddenly at your door. It is Martin, your neighbor. His fire went out. He asks for embers. You invite him in without hesitation. Share coals from your hearth into his clay pot. Mutual dependence is the only insurance policy peasants possess. As he leaves, he mutters that the bailiff has been asking questions again. About Eleanor. About others. Control does not sleep, even in snow. Later that night, you lie awake listening to wind scraping the thatch. Your wife's breathing slows beside you. Your children are pressed between you like small hot stones. Smoke curls above. And you realize the greatest danger may not be the cold outside, but the scrutiny warming itself at your door. The church calendar and the winter body you learn to measure time by saints and storms. The liturgical calendar governs your year. Advent, Christmas, Epiphany. Lent approaches with its long fasts and longer sermons. By church teaching in the medieval period, sexual abstinence is required during Lent and on certain feast days. Add restrictions during menstruation, pregnancy, and postpartum recovery, and the window narrows. Now layer winter on top of that. You kneel on stone floors colder than the fields outside. The priest speaks of restraint as virtue. You feel your toes go numb. Here's the psychological strain. Regulation becomes heavier when nature is harsh. In periods of famine or plague, sermons intensify. Moral failure is blamed for environmental disaster. Sexual misconduct becomes a convenient target, but data from ecclesiastical courts suggests something else. Cases spike not necessarily because behavior increases, but because enforcement tightens during instability. You sit in confession, whispering details of your marriage bed. The priest asks whether you sought pleasure. You hesitate. Pleasure feels like a luxury word when you count firewood daily, but it exists. Winter compresses space. In northern climates, darkness stretches 15 hours or more. Candles are expensive. After dusk, you gather close. There's an honesty in shared cold. Bodies pressed together not for romance alone, but for mutual survival. Yet shame lingers. Women often bear disproportionate blame. If pregnancy occurs at an inconvenient time, suspicion falls. If a widow seeks companionship, tongues wag. Midwives navigate dangerous ground. They assist in childbirth. They know herbs that can end pregnancies. Authorities sometimes accuse them of sorcery. Historical records from England and parts of France show prosecutions for illicit sexual conduct tied to community gossip. Control operates through neighbors as much as clergy. You feel it in the way conversations pause when someone enters. But beneath official morality, a parallel culture thrives. Folk traditions around midwinter festivals include dancing, feasting, and yes, pairing off. Even as the church attempts to Christianize seasonal rites, older customs bleed through. You attend a winter feast in the manor barn. Torches flare. Music scrapes from a fiddle. For a few hours, hierarchy softens. You see Eleanor there, speaking quietly with the miller. No shame in her posture now. Only steadiness. The cold presses against the barn walls. Inside, laughter rises like heat. Children test it first, then older boys. Eventually, even adults step onto its glassy surface. You walk carefully across one afternoon. Breath white, boots crunching snow. The manor house looms beyond, stone walls rimmed with icicles. Class differences visible in winter. Inside the manor, braziers burn charcoal. Tapestries insulate walls. Servants refill hearths. Lords wear fur-lined cloaks of squirrel or fox. You wear patched wool and prayer. But here is the twist. Cold humbles everyone. Even the Lord cannot command spring. Records from 14th and 15th century Europe show that severe winters affect all strata. Rivers freeze. Trade slows, food prices spike. Rebellions sometimes simmer beneath frost. In 1381, only decades earlier, English peasants rose in revolt. Taxes, labor controls, after the Black Death, economic strain. Winter hardship feeds unrest. You think about that as you stand on the ice. Because control over bodies mirrors control over labor. After the Black Death, labor shortages increased peasants' bargaining power. Authorities respond with statutes like the 1351 Statute of Laborers in England, attempting to freeze wages and bind workers to pre-plague conditions. Freeze. The word feels intentional. Your body is regulated for work, for reproduction, for morality. But winter reminds you that your body is also fragile, mortal, warm only briefly. That night, the wind howls so fiercely the shutters slam open. Snow blasts inside. You scramble to secure them. In the chaos, your youngest wakes crying. Your wife gathers him close, wraps him inside her own cloak. Skin to skin. It is instinct older than canon law. Later, you hear that a couple in the neighboring village was found dead in their bed. Fire out. Window cracked. Cold took them quietly. People say they were sinful. Lived together without marriage. As if frost checks marital status. You feel anger stir beneath your ribs. The priest speaks again of order, of God's design, of obedience. But you have seen enough winter to understand this. Survival is not neat. You lie awake, listening to the timber beams creak. Your wife's breath warms your shoulder. If authorities push too hard, people bend. Sometimes they break. Sometimes they push back. The ice on the pond groans under shifting weight. And somewhere beneath its surface, dark water moves unseen. Fire, flesh, and the unwritten rules. By late winter, you no longer count days. You count logs. Each piece of wood represents another night alive. Another morning not frozen. Inside your cottage, you have developed rituals. Bank the fire carefully before sleep. Layer straw thick. Hang extra wool over door seams. Keep children between adults. Rotate who rises at night to tend embers. Unwritten rules. Practical laws stronger than sermons. The church continues its vigilance. Marriage bans announced publicly to prevent clandestine unions. Penances assigned for illicit relations. Public shaming possible. But enforcement is uneven. Priests are human. Some are strict, others pragmatic. Father Guillaume is somewhere in between. He warns, he fines lightly. He understands winter, even if he pretends otherwise. Eleanor's case lingers in memory. She continues to see the miller, discreetly. Not defiantly, not secretly. Simply steadily. Community tolerance shifts subtly. Because enough households face the same calculus. Let me bring this into sharp focus. Medieval peasants survived the cold through architecture, animal heat, layered textiles, communal living, and shared labor. They also survive through intimacy. Physical closeness regulates temperature. Emotional closeness regulates despair. Sexuality in winter is not indulgence. It is affirmation that life continues despite famine, plague, and frost. Yet danger persists. Accusations of immorality can spiral. especially toward women living outside expected roles. Witchcraft hysteria will erupt more violently in later centuries, but seeds exist already. An unmarried pregnancy in winter invites scrutiny. A widow with visitors invites gossip. A midwife with herbal knowledge invites fear. And still, people love. Or at least they cling. You step outside one last time before sleep. The sky is clear. Stars cut sharp against black. Your breath rises. The world feels suspended between ice and thaw. Inside, your family waits beneath wool and smoke. You return, close the door, secure the latch. You lie down, pull them close, feel their warmth settle into your bones. Winter is not over. Authority has not softened. Hunger still prowls. But beneath blankets and beyond doctrine, you understand something simple and dangerous. No matter how tightly power grips the body remembers how to generate heat. And as the embers dim and the wind quiets for a single fragile hour, you sense that when spring comes, not everything will thaw gently. When the thaw reveals what winter hid, the first bip of thaw sounds like a confession. Water slides from the thatch in uneven rhythms. Snow recedes in gray patches. The earth beneath is not reborn yet. It is exposed. Winter covered many things: tracks, graves, secrets. Now the ground softens. You step outside and feel mud swallow your boots. The manor pond that held you safely weeks ago now cracks along its edges. Ice fractures into floating shards. Spring does not arrive gently in the 14th century. It limps in, smelling of rot. Here is the part no one romanticizes. When snow melts, bodies sometimes surface. Livestock that froze in ditches. The occasional villager found too late. And rumors thaw too. Eleanor's belly is no longer ambiguous. The miller stands closer to her, at market now, not touching. Just close enough that everyone understands. The priest calls for a meeting. But winter blurred boundaries. Survival over ceremony. The priest asks the miller if he will legitimize the child through marriage. Silence stretches. You feel it in your ribs, because marriage is not just romance. It is property agreements, dowry negotiation, obligations to the manor lord. The miller finally nods. Not dramatic, just firm. A murmur runs through the nave. The priest assigns penance, public confession, a small fine. Then marriage banns will be read. Official order restored. But something deeper has shifted. Winter forced choices that did not wait for approval. The community witnessed survival overriding stigma. You walk home through damp air heavy with thaw. Your wife squeezes your hand. You realize how close your own life came to scrutiny. How thin the line was between private warmth and public shame. Dry thought flickers through your mind. Apparently, frost is more forgiving than gossip. The fields must be plowed soon. Oxen lean and weary are let out. Tools repaired. Seeds counted carefully after famine years. Life resumes its cycle. But winter has left marks. You notice more couples moving with quiet confidence. Less fear in their posture. Enforcement has not vanished. It has recalibrated. Because when everyone breaks a rule to survive, punishing all becomes impractical. Power adapts. And as you watch water carve new paths through mud, you understand that control, like ice, looks solid until pressure builds beneath it. The last fire of the season, one final cold night lingers, even as buds threaten to open. You sit before the hearth, flames smaller now, less desperate. Wood is still precious, but not life or death urgent. Your children sleep easier. The cow has been moved back toward the yard. The air inside the cottage feels wider. Winter is ending. You think back over the months, the hunger, the closeness, the scrutiny. The quiet acts of resistance. Here is the truth carved by frost. Medieval peasants survived the coldest nights through layered wool, shared beds, animal heat, careful fire tending, architectural improvisation, and communal dependence. They survived through knowledge passed in whispers and hands calloused by repetition. But they also survived by refusing to freeze emotionally, despite canon law, despite ecclesiastical courts, despite sermons linking sexuality to divine punishment. You remember specific years etched into communal memory. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. The Black Death beginning in 1348. The harsh winters recorded in chronicles across England and France. Each crisis tightened authorities' grip. And each winter forced people closer together. Desire under repression becomes complicated, not reckless, not mindless. Human. You lie beside your wife one last time before spring truly arrives. The air is cool but not cruel. No storm rattles the shutters tonight. You think about the balance peasants lived with daily, between obedience and necessity, between doctrine and frostbite, between shame and survival. Historians often write of medieval people as subjects of power. And they were, but they were also strategists of warmth. They carved box beds, hung woolen curtains, shared livestock air, timed their intimacy around feast days when possible, ignored them when necessary. They navigated gender expectations carefully. Women bore scrutiny but wielded domestic expertise. Men labored outside but relied on interior knowledge to keep families alive. Eleanor walks past your cottage at dusk, the miller at her side now, bands read, wedding imminent. Her chin is lifted. Winter tried to isolate her. Community almost did too. She did not freeze. You step outside. The sky carries a faint promise of green. The last embers in your hearth glow low. You could let them die now. Morning will be warmer, but you feed them one final log, because fire is memory. It happens decades later, when stories of earlier famines have settled into legend and a new generation believes the worst is memory. By the early 10th century, colder patterns deepen across parts of Europe. Chroniclers in France and England describe winters where wine freezes in barrels and mills stand silent because water no longer flows. You walk to the river at dawn. The surface is white, unbroken, stretching like a road toward the opposite bank. Men test it with poles. Someone laughs nervously. Someone else mutters a prayer. He does not have to. You feel the familiar squeeze of scrutiny. Because even after Eleanor's marriage, even after winters survived, the pattern persists. When nature turns hostile, power searches for human fault. Records from ecclesiastical courts in the 1400s show continued prosecution of illicit sex. Though enforcement varies by region, some priests focus more on tithes, others on beds. It depends who holds the candle. You return home across the frozen river, boots crunching on ice. Your reflection beneath the surface looks trapped. Inside your cottage, improvements have been made over the years. A small chimney flue directs smoke better now. Thicker wool curtains hang around the bed. Experience breeds adaptation. You no longer fear winter the way you once did, but you respect it. Your wife, older too, laughs softly when you mention the priest's latest sermon. She has heard them all. Famine sermons, plague sermons, lust sermons, snow sermons. Dry thought crosses your mind. Apparently, God prefers temperate weather and celibacy. Yet the pattern is undeniable. Extreme cold compresses communities. Physically and psychologically, shared hardship can foster solidarity. It can also intensify blame. In neighboring villages, whispers begin about a healer accused of encouraging unnatural acts. No formal witch hunts yet, not in your lifetime, but suspicion gathers easily when fear is abundant. Control of sexuality is rarely just about morality. It is about predictability, about inheritance, about maintaining social hierarchy in unstable times. When bodies pair outside sanctioned structures, property lines blur. Authority dislikes blur. You lie awake one night listening to wind scrape the shutters. Your children, nearly grown, sleep nearby. Soon they will build cottages of their own. You wonder what they will inherit. Better chimneys, perhaps. Stronger walls. The memory of how to survive cold. But also the memory of how power behaves when winter bites hardest. The river ice begins to crack in early March. Loud reports echo like distant thunder. You stand on the bank watching fissures widen. It occurs to you that ice does not melt because it is persuaded. It melts because temperature shifts slowly and relentlessly beneath it, and you begin to suspect that social control works the same way. What the cold could not kill, spring finally arrives in full. Not gentle, not poetic. Mud, rot, lambing cries in the fields, tools dragged from storage. You step into the sunlight and feel something almost shocking on your skin. Warmth without negotiation. Winter did not kill you. It did not kill Eleanor. It did not extinguish the quiet rebellions in shared beds or whispered herb lore. It did not silence laughter in manor barns or extinguish the knowledge women carried in their hands, but it left questions. Here is the haunting truth. Medieval peasants survived the coldest nights through material strategies: insulation, communal housing, livestock warmth, layered wool, rationed fuel, architectural evolution. That is the physical story. They also survived through emotional and bodily closeness, often in tension with institutional authority. That is the human story. The church sought order. It codified marriage, regulated sex, enforced confession. Sometimes it protected stability, sometimes it overreached. Manorial lords sought labor consistency. The Statute of Laborers after 1351 attempted to freeze wages and bind workers. Economic control intertwined with bodily control, and every winter stress tested those systems. You walk past the churchyard where frost once sealed graves. Grass pushes through. You remember nights of shared breath inside woolen curtains, the fear of being overheard, the calculation between sin and survival. You understand now that winter exposed truths summer concealed. People will endure doctrine, they will endure hunger, they will endure cold, but they will not easily endure isolation. You watch your eldest daughter walk toward the well with a young man beside her. They speak quietly, shoulders nearly touching. You know the priest will preach restraint again next winter. You also know that when frost creeps beneath doors and embers burn low, sermons will not be the first defense against death. Body heat will. Community will. Intimacy will. The cycle will repeat. Colder years may come. War may sweep through. Plague may return. Authority will respond the way it always has, with rules, with scrutiny, with names for things it fears. And peasants will respond the way they always have, with adaptation, with quiet defiance, with beds built like fortresses against frost. You stand at your cottage threshold one last time, sun warming your face. The hearth behind you crackles gently. Not desperate now, just steady. Winter proved something. No matter how harsh the season, no matter how heavy the doctrine, no matter how tightly power tries to grip the body, warmth begins in the smallest, most human places. And the next time the coldest night comes, the real question will not be how you survive it. The real question will be who decides what survival is allowed to look like.